On a cold February night in 1978, five young men from the Yuba City, California area piled into a car for what should have been a fun, simple trip. They were driving about 50 miles to watch a college basketball game, all of them hyped for their own Special Olympics tournament the very next day. They cheered, they grabbed some snacks for the road, and then they started the drive home. They never made it. 4 days later, their 1969 Mercury Montego was found on a remote mountain road, miles in the wrong direction and stuck in a snowbank. The car was unlocked and the wrappers from their snacks were still inside. But the men were gone. The search that followed ended in a tragedy so strange and heartbreaking, it's sometimes called the American Dyatlov Pass. 4 of the men were eventually found dead. The 5th is still missing. This is the story of the Yuba County Five. Nearly 50 years later, what happened on that final fateful drive remains one of America's most baffling, unsolved mysteries. First, you have to understand who these men were. There was Jack Madruga, 30, Bill Sterling, 29, Jack Jackie Hewitt, 24, Ted Wire, 32, and Gary Mathias, 25. In their community, they were simply known as the Boys. With the exception of Gary Mathias, the men lived with varying intellectual or developmental disabilities. Mathias himself lived with schizophrenia, which he had struggled with at times, but had been managing for the 2 years prior to his disappearance. All 5 were bonded by a deep love for sports and played together on a basketball team called the Gateway Gators. On Friday, February 24, 1978, they were completely focused on a Special Olympics basketball tournament happening the next day. The prize was a trip to Los Angeles, and they were ready. Uniforms laid out and everything. To get pumped up, they decided to drive north to Chico to watch a college game. Jack Madruga, a proud Army vet who babied his prized Mercury Montego, was behind the wheel. His family said he was a careful driver who hated the cold and would never have willingly taken his car onto rough, snowy roads. The men were only dressed in light jackets, not nearly enough for the winter conditions they were about to face in the mountains. The game in Chico ended around 10 p.m. The men then drove to a local market to grab snacks for the ride home: pies, candy, sodas, and milk. A clerk saw them, and it was the last confirmed sighting of the 5 friends alive. From that market, the drive back to Yuba City should have been a straight shot south on a familiar highway. But that's not what happened. For reasons that are still the central question of this case, instead of heading south, the car turned east, climbing deep into the Plumas National Forest. They drove for miles up a winding, little-traveled mountain road as a winter storm was brewing in the higher elevations, heading completely away from home. When the men didn't show up for their big game, their families knew something was seriously wrong and reported them missing. 4 days later, on February 28th, a forest ranger found Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego on the snowy Oroville-Quincy Highway. It was about 70 miles from where they were last seen in Chico. The car's condition just made things weirder. It was unlocked with a window rolled down. Inside were the empty snack wrappers. Investigators noted the car was mechanically sound, had gas in the tank, and was not seriously stuck. It showed signs the wheels had spun, but it seemed like 5 men should have been able to push it free, and yet they hadn't. The keys were gone, but in the glove box lay a set of road maps, untouched. Why would 5 men, dressed for a trip to town, abandon a working car in a freezing storm to wander deeper into the wilderness? It was a question that baffled everyone. The search was immediately hampered by the brutal winter weather. It wasn't until 4 months later, in early June 1978, that the melting snow began to reveal the awful truth. A group of motorcyclists stumbled upon a Forest Service trailer, a shelter for rangers, nearly 20 miles from the abandoned car. A window was broken out. Inside, they found the body of Ted Wire. He was wrapped tightly in 8 sheets, almost like a burial shroud. An autopsy estimated he had lost around 80 to 100 pounds and had survived for as long as 8 to 13 weeks after disappearing, before finally dying of starvation and hypothermia. His feet were terribly frostbitten. The most bizarre detail? The trailer was stocked with canned military rations, but only a few had been eaten. A propane tank and heating supplies were there, ready to be used, but they were never turned on. The discovery of Wire's body relaunched the search. Soon after, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found about 11 miles from the car. Investigators believed one may have given in to the exhaustion of hypothermia, and his friend refused to leave his side. A short time later, Jackie Hewitt's remains were found in the woods, a discovery tragically made by his own father. 4 of the 5 men had been found. But where was Gary Mathias? Searchers did find his sneakers inside the trailer, suggesting he had been there with Ted. But of Mathias himself, there was no trace. He has never been found. The story of the Yuba County Five is a maze of unanswered questions. For nearly 50 years, theories have swirled, but none perfectly fit the facts. Before we get into those, if you find yourself drawn to these kinds of enduring mysteries, take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell. It really helps us continue to explore these important unsolved cases. The simplest explanation is that it was all a terrible chain of events. The theory goes that the men simply took a wrong turn out of Chico. Confused and already on an unfamiliar road, they drove on until they were lost in the snowy mountains. When the car got stuck, panic, combined with their cognitive disabilities, could have led to poor decisions. Hypothermia is known to impair judgment long before it becomes fatal. They might have experienced paradoxical undressing or felt strangely warm, leading them to believe walking out was the right move. After breaking into the trailer, some have speculated they might have been afraid of getting in trouble for using the supplies, preventing them from accessing the food and heat that could have saved them. It's a plausible theory. In this scenario, after Ted died, a desperate Gary Mathias might have tried to walk for help, only to be claimed by the vast wilderness himself. But what if they weren't alone on that mountain? While long treated as a tragic accident, some investigators have always considered foul play a possibility, especially concerning Gary Mathias. In fact, his case is still considered an open missing person investigation, with some internal law enforcement documents suggesting he is believed to be a victim of foul play. This theory gained traction from a witness, Joseph Shawns, who told police he was also on that road the same night, stuck in the snow and suffering a heart attack. He gave a confusing account of seeing headlights, hearing whistles and voices, and seeing a group of people that included what he thought was a woman and a baby. When he cried out for help, he said the voices and lights vanished. His testimony was inconsistent, and he admitted he was in extreme pain, so it's hard to know what he really saw. Still, the idea that someone forced the men up the mountain could explain why they drove so erratically and abandoned a perfectly good car. They were escaping a threat. Unverified rumors about an altercation at the market have persisted for years. If foul play was involved, it might also explain why Gary Mathias was never found. Almost 50 years later, the questions are as haunting as ever. Why didn't they use the maps in the car? How did Jack Madruga, who hated rough roads, drive his car so far up that treacherous mountain pass without damaging the undercarriage? Why did they not use the abundant food and heat in the trailer that could have saved their lives? The initial investigation has also been criticized. The case spanned multiple counties, which may have led to communication breakdowns, and some family members felt the initial response was too slow, possibly costing the men a crucial window for rescue. The fate of the Yuba County Five is a story without a clear ending. We know how 4 of them died. from the brutal effects of exposure and starvation, but we'll likely never know why. Were they victims of one wrong turn and an unforgiving wilderness, with their disabilities hindering their ability to cope? Or did they have a dangerous encounter on that cold February night, becoming victims of a crime that remains unsolved? The only person who might have held the answers, Gary Mathias, disappeared into the snow, leaving a gaping hole at the center of this tragedy. The story of the Yuba County Five is a chilling reminder of how quickly a normal night out can turn into an inexplicable nightmare, leaving behind decades of grief and a mystery that stubbornly refuses to be solved. What do you think happened on that final drive? Let me know your theories in the comments below.